So with this gospel, it's important to start with the basics. It is not about making money for God. The talents represent your life. So the parable is basically about doing something with your life. Don't just sit around like that third guy with the one talent. God expects more of us than that. So for the sake of a new direction for this particular gospel reading, conveniently enough, I spent the majority of this week with a series of lectures in the Sheriff's Department of Dodge County. We were learning about group crisis intervention and all of that. And interestingly enough, the conference room they put us in was physically in the jail building. So I did go to jail Monday through Thursday. Just a little piece of trivia for you. It was interesting. We covered a lot of stuff those 4 days, but one critical thing that came up more often than not was PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Apparently, that term is a tad out of date, by the way. Post-traumatic stress injury is apparently a more politically correct term. But basically, the idea is stress exists automatically. It's everywhere. And we deal with it in a healthy way 99% of the time. We have emotional peaks and valleys, totally normal. The problem is when we get stuck in those peaks or those valleys. When we get stuck in an emotional high, that's when we have issues with anxiety, restlessness, panic attacks. And PTSD, generally speaking, is when we're stuck in that emotional low. We don't feel happy. We don't feel sad. We just feel numb. We don't want to see other people. We don't want to do anything. We don't want to go out. We don't want to do anything, really. And so PTSD, in a way, is when a trauma happens, you hit an emotional low, and then you stay there in that state of emptiness, and you can't move on with your life. And we believe that we have developed this way as people because PTSD serves as emotional armor. It is very useful in protecting yourself from future traumas, which is extremely important for people who have been hurt and are emotionally vulnerable. So that all makes sense. But the problem is it works too well. PTSD proves to be armor against bad future experiences, but also good future experiences. So it's hard to recover from PTSD on your own. So all of that is basically a psychological seminar which I am not qualified to teach you. Here's where it becomes a homily. Here's where it applies to the here and now. All of us, literally every single one of us here today, is at a greater than usual risk of being that third guy in the gospel, the one that didn't do anything with his life. We're at that greater risk because this pandemic is a trauma. Absolutely. You probably don't think of it like that because we think of traumas as one-time things, not month-long experiences. But it absolutely is a trauma because it is a never-ending source of additional stress. And if we're not careful, we will fall into that trap of hitting an emotional low point and getting stuck there. A post-traumatic stress injury. You know what that looks like. Everybody here has at least one person in their life who has clearly been in that emotional low point for longer than they ought to have been. This applies to young people, it applies to old people. So for the sake of fairness, I think my real life example today, I should pick on someone my own age. A few weeks ago, I finally got the guys together for board game night. That is harder than it sounds like. But I managed it, and it was only 4 of us. It wasn't that dangerous. But we got together, and we just wanted to get together for a Friday night and play Settlers of Catan. So we get there. Pizzas are in the oven. Joe is setting up the board. And one of our friends starts to complain. Let's call him Ryan. His name actually is Ryan. I'm not protecting, I don't know Ryan any favors, okay? I'm not protecting his identity. So Ryan starts to complain. Guys, I'm not in the mood for a board game. Can we just hang out on the couch and watch YouTube videos for a while? And the rest of us were not having that. Ryan, we have done nothing but watch Netflix and YouTube for 8 months. Can we please do something that involves other people? And we practically had to drag Ryan to the kitchen table, which would be easy enough. Joe is ex-military, so he would have been fine. And we put the pieces in Ryan's hand, and we played it. And mind you that Settlers of Catan is a long game. That is easily a 2-hour thing, especially if you have a new player. So we finished at about 10 o'clock at night. And we finish, we're packing up the board, and Ryan, of all people, says, you know, guys, this was really fun. Do you think we could play another round? I'm like, yes! That was perfect, and we very much did. I don't mind telling you, I went to bed a whole lot later than I'm used to, and it was totally worth it, because it was for the sake of spending time with people I care about. And that is the #1 tool you have to get yourself or someone else out of that emotional low point, whether it's PTSD or not, to spend time with people who understand you and care about you. So the point of all of this is we can't stay in that rut of do-nothingism. We can't stay there. We all have our emotional ups and downs. We all have nights where we need to stay in, do nothing, and just veg out. I would not call that wasted time. We all need that. But it can't last forever. It must end at some point. Because if it doesn't, that's the third guy in the gospel. The guy that did nothing with his life and had nothing to show for it. We are not called to that. So, mind you, the solution here is not to just ignore the pandemic. Masks should be second nature at this point. Literally, we should not leave the home without them. And we should be washing our hands, staying away from each other to the best of our ability. All those rules exist for a reason. But the first step in avoiding a trap is knowing that one exists in the first place. So know and understand that even if it feels like life is on pause right now, it's not. The clock is still ticking. And we all have talents that are meant to be spent and invested and used. And that is never going to happen if you let your stress paralyze you mentally and spiritually. So even if our abilities and even if our opportunities are limited these days, let us rather go forth and do what we can for the glory of God. And we just might find that when we do exactly that, we will be like the first and second guy in the gospel and discover that we will end with more spiritual treasure than we started with.